Welcome to the All Ambient podcast, where we dig into the creative process, hear untold stories, and explore the brilliant minds behind some of the finest ambient music out there. I'm your host, Mike Graff. I'm excited to be in this together with you. Let's get going. Hey, welcome to the podcast, everybody. My name is Mike Graff, and I make music as Dear Gravity. It is wonderful to be together with you today. I cannot wait for you to get the chance to hear from Jameson Nathan Jones, the one, the only. Before we dig into that conversation, I want to say a huge thank you to All Ambient. That's all-ambient.com. What an incredible music licensing site for all things ambient and cinematic music. If you are a creator and you are tired of digging through catalogs that have a bunch of music that might not be the best fit for your project, for any project, All Ambient is absolutely the perfect licensing site for you. Every song that's on All Ambient has been expertly curated. There is nothing on the site that doesn't feel great. And even better is that there are curated song bundles that are all designed around an individual theme or feel that can fit your film, video, your project perfectly. It's absolutely a great solution to your music licensing needs. Go check it out at all-ambient.com. That's all-ambient.com. And if you use the promo code podcast25, you will save 25% on your order. That is a huge savings on an already great deal for some incredible music. And fun fact, when you license your music on a site like All Ambient, you can know that you are directly supporting the artists and allowing them to continue to make more and more music in the way that they do so that you can continue to make great projects in the very way that you do. What a cool thing. Go check it out at all-ambient.com. My guest today is Jameson Nathan Jones, who hardly needs an introduction, but this guy's work spans the far corners of the ambient genre, not just from a modular synth perspective, but also a classical perspective. He finds inspiration in some incredible instruments, including one that's hundreds of years old and takes up an entire room, and you'll learn a little bit more about that in a little bit. But there's just so much wisdom for you to take in, and to hear his heart is just a really cool thing. I can't wait any longer. I'm really excited for you to get the chance to hear from Jameson Nathan Jones. Let's not wait any longer. Here we go. All right, friends, I am beyond thrilled to be able to sit down with someone who I've admired and looked up to for quite a while. And of all the things that we've kind of crisscrossed throughout the years, this is the first time that we're actually digitally, of course, but sitting down face to face. Could not be more excited about it. Jameson Nathan Jones, welcome to the All Ambient podcast.
Oh, thanks, Mike. I really appreciate you having me. It's an honor. I love what you're doing, both as an artist and what Slow Echo is doing as a whole. And pleasure to be a tiny part of what you guys have released so far.
Oh, man.
Yeah, it's been awesome.
Well, let's not downsize it to just a tiny part. You're an awesome part, and it's great to have you, man. And for the record, Jameson Nathan Jones is the stage name. You go by Nathan, though, right?
Yeah, with friends and family and everything, but I'm not going to get offended if somebody calls me my first name.
I'm going to just, you can stop me if you think that we're not there yet, but I'm going to go with Nathan. Can we go with Nathan?
That's cool.
Amazing.
That's totally fine.
I love
totally
it.
Fine.
You can call me whatever you want. I mean, you can make up a name and it's fine. But
right, I feel the same way about it. It's like however people want to. I've been answering to my first name in the doctor's office for years now. So
that's when you know that somebody doesn't really know you that well. When they're like Jameson, and you're like, oh right, we're not at that level yet. Okay, I get it. The doctor's office,
like,
the
DMV.
How
dare you not automatically know that I don't go by my first name? Right. That's very offensive.
Oh man, we could go down a whole rabbit hole just on that. I love it.
Yeah.
We haven't even gotten started. There we
We're
go.
rolling. We're rolling.
Oh, it's so good. Well, man, Nathan, of all the stuff that we're going to touch base on, I've got so many questions. Again, this has been a long time coming, and I think it's going to be so fun to go all over the map. And not that you haven't drawn a cohesive line between it all, but there are just so many pieces of the puzzle in your artistry and all that I'm so excited about. So we are going to be all over the map, and it's going to be fun. But just to kind of get things rolling, tell me a little bit about how you got started in the music world, whether, it was back in the past and you started feeling out like, wow, I think this is going to be a significant part of life, or what were some of the perhaps early memories that really kick-started, or you saw as maybe the genesis to your music story?
Yeah. So started really young, actually. Probably my first memory that I have of exposure to music was my dad exposing me to his Yes records back in the day. So I was like a huge Yes fan early on, and I'm talking like toddler age. There's incriminating video evidence of me dancing to Roundabout. Might have been wearing a diaper even that early. So very, very early start. My dad is a musician. My mom's a musician.
Wow.
Neither of them ended up staying in that profession, but it was still, there was a deep love for music in the house. And around the age of 8, I started piano lessons, wanted to play guitar, but my mom was like, if you're going to learn music theory, the keyboard is the best way to visualize that. And so I never got to play guitar because I ended up just sticking with piano. Just like, well, I don't want to practice twice as hard. I don't want to practice 2 things. So yeah, studied piano all the way through, ended up going to college for piano performance.
Yeah.
So yeah, I got a couple degrees in piano performance. And somewhere around that time, I started getting interested in I really appreciate what composers do more than just people who kind of regurgitate what composers have written. It seemed like magic to me, like what a composer could do. It's like, yeah, of course, anyone if with the talent and the practice, I guess, could learn to perform, but to write something like that, what does that actually take?
Yeah.
So I was fascinated with that, and I got into composition around that time. Had the chance to study a little bit of composition during my master's degree. And from there, I, of course, like everyone, was like, well, film scoring seems cool. And so how does a person get into that? Having no idea how that even worked or how to make music in a computer at all.
Yep.
So this would have been around like 2012, I guess.
Sure.
And I was like, well, I should buy a computer and Cubase because I just learned that exists and just see if I can figure out how to do that. Because like everything I'd written to that point was like in the art music world, classical, written to be performed stuff, just, usually writing it down with pencil and staff paper and then putting it into Sibelius or whatever. Yeah. So yeah, very different workflow to what we do these days. But yeah, I found that I really enjoyed like the music technology stuff once I figured out how it kind of worked. It was a bit of a learning curve, but and then at some point I was like, well, I don't know anybody in film or anything. So I was ready to move out to LA.
Wow.
And then I realized I hate traffic after going out there a couple times. And
I was going to say, that's a good thing to realize before you make the jump. Yeah.
Yeah. And I also realized, wow, it's really expensive to live out here. I'm from Mississippi, so there is a little bit of a difference in the cost of living there. And so I decided to just work on, since I found a real joy for just like working on my own music production and recording my own work, I was like, well, maybe I could just work on developing my own artistic voice because I saw people like Olafur Arnalds, who was probably the first person I was exposed to and the scene that we're a little closer to, modern classical and more ambient. And I was like, well, he's doing film scoring and stuff, but people are coming to him because they want something that sounds like him, So it was like, that seems like maybe a more doable thing, especially where I am in the world. So, and it kind of worked. Like I haven't scored any, Marvel pictures or anything like that anyone would have heard of, but I've had a chance to do right. Exactly. Yeah. Ant-Man versus Thor or whatever is actually what I'm working on currently.
Marvel Phase 17.
NDA. Just violated an NDA right there. But so that's essentially what I set out to do was like, it was kind of like, well, I'll release my own stuff with the goal of getting film jobs. Yeah. And that kind of happened. And I realized, I kind of enjoy just working on my own stuff just as much or more. So yeah, that's kind of just been my focus the last, 7 or 8 years. That was a really long answer, and I don't even remember what the question was.
No, I'm so glad for the answer, and I think it's gonna branch off to a whole bunch of other questions and answers for sure. No, I love that, man, and I mean you hit on so many things, but just even that last part, like the idea of film scoring is its own animal, right? Like there's that balance of when you're writing stuff for yourself, similar to Oliver, where you're writing stuff, you're releasing it, people are taking it in, and then how cool it is for him and for you and you know all those folks to be approached after hearing stuff that you've released and saying, hey, I want you to be a part of this film, I want you to score to this film. But film, it's almost as though composing for film in a lot of senses is just the polar opposite from composing or like producing, recording music for film licensing, where it's like I'm gonna make this, and then you decide if it fits your piece, and you kind of wrap your film, your short film, your commercial, your podcast, your YouTube video around this song, versus a film where it's like, hey, we're getting close to, depending on the stage, like we're getting close to a locked picture. Here's where we need you to hit, this frame. We want kind of an impactful moment here, so that you're almost composing more so to fit what already exists, as opposed to you composing whatever the heck you want, and then they match the film to your music. And so I appreciate both sides of the coin for sure. Mm-hmm. Is there a side of that you, of the two sides, where you're writing something that someone will then perhaps like not just stream, but also license and put in a video or whatnot, versus, hey, I've created a film, I've created a video, and I want you to write music to that video? Which one of those is maybe the more creatively fulfilling for you? Or are they both fulfilling in different ways and they sort of balance each other out? Or if you had to just pick one of those two lanes, which would be the one that you would go down? And that's not saying that we can't find a balance in all things in life, but yeah, tell me a little bit more about what's fulfilling you creatively on that spectrum.
Well, I think there are different ways of approaching both. It's one thing just to write music like we do and release music and then say, okay, here's this thing that I made. If you want to find a place for it, cool.
Yeah.
But I don't really, and I don't know about if you approach it the same way, but I don't really think about like how someone's going to use it if I'm writing my own solo stuff. I just write what I think is good, or what I want to do.
Yeah.
I'm not thinking like, okay, there needs to be a break here for an edit. Like someone who was specifically writing for like trailer music or something would be thinking about those things. So licensing is kind of a broad term in that way, because you can work for a production house where it's just like, okay, here's the brief and you have to write to that. It's in this style and you have to have a cut here and it has to change tempo here so that the edit works. Or you could just write whatever you want and hope it fits somewhere, and it may or may not,
Yeah.
So I tend to enjoy the latter there, where it's just I'm free to do what I feel like works the best musically, or whatever I'm feeling like doing. I guess it's a very selfish way to do it, but I do think that the best work usually comes out that way. You know what I mean?
I do.
Yeah, because you really are connected with it emotionally, and I think that comes across. I really do. And other people can connect with it then as well. And then also on the film side, if you do approach it as you try to be an artist first, and then a director comes to you because they found what you've already done,
right?
You do tend to have a bit more creative freedom and creative input, because that director is literally coming for what you do.
Almost a layer of trust sort of baked into the process already. Yeah,
exactly. Like nobody comes to Trent Reznor and wants him to write the Interstellar. Right. No one comes with the Interstellar temp to Trent Reznor and be like, hey, can you do something like this?
Yeah.
It makes no sense, right? They want Trent Reznor to be Trent Reznor. So I kind of enjoy that, and I get into the weeds a bit on like my YouTube channel and stuff about, artistic voice and how you can find creativity while maintaining a consistent artistic voice, even though sometimes those two themes seem to be at odds with each other,
Yeah.
But to me, that's kind of the craft of it all, is like trying to find, okay, what is my sound, but how can I also push the limits of it and figure out new ways to do things and it still sound like me, if that makes sense.
100% makes sense. That's a great transition to your YouTube presence, Nathan.
Shameless plug there.
Oh man, zero shame involved there, man. I love what's happening over on your channel for multiple reasons, and we'll keep digging in deeper, but I love how it seems like there's a lot of self-expression there. Like you're genuinely just kind of capturing stuff that excites you, but there is also that balance, kind of what you said, where there's like that mental, emotional processing through how to approach the creative process. And that is not only just a great thing for us to remind ourselves of, right? But also to encourage those who are perhaps just, one step behind in the process and need that word of encouragement. And so thank you for doing that faithfully, man. But yeah, the YouTube thing, tell me about that, man, because you're seeing some really cool success in that lane. Was the goal like, okay, I'm going to go crush it on YouTube? Or was it more, I want to use this as a creative exercise, and then people just sort of found it and it was like, well, cool. If there's momentum, maybe I should do more of it? Or unravel that story a little bit for me.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. Like I definitely, prior to really getting started consistently on the YouTube channel, I had been doing a lot of like Instagram stuff where I would just film myself, just literally filming me playing and stuff,
Yeah.
And so I kind of got into a little bit the cinematography and everything. And then I was like, well, how could I tell some kind of a story that would kind of shine a light on my music, because I wanted to keep the focus there. And I was like, well, honestly, the first thing I could think of to talk about, because this is what I watch on YouTube, is like the gear that I use.
Right.
So it was all synth reviews and stuff.
Which is so fun. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, it was. It was for a while.
Oh, we're about to dig into something I've been waiting to talk to you about, but we'll get there. Yeah.
Yeah, I found after a while, I kind of realized making synth videos centered around a product was not necessarily what I ultimately wanted to do.
Sure.
It was just literally the first thing I thought of. So, I learned a lot doing those videos, and I'm not saying I'll never do another video featuring like how to do something on a synthesizer, because I do enjoy teaching that kind of stuff too. But I don't really like playing the role of marketer for somebody else.
Sure.
You know what I mean? For like a company or whatever.
Yep.
Because I mean, most of us are just doing it for free. We're not compensated for it in any way. But then you start getting sent stuff for free.
Yep.
And then it's like there's an expectation there when something releases that it's like, oh, you need to shoot a video for us on this date. And it's like, well, I'm not being paid per se. You sent me a piece of free gear, which is payment in a way, but I can't eat it.
Sure. Right.
It's like I can't eat a synthesizer. So
it is not feeding my family. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And the amount of work that it takes too, I think a lot of people don't realize, but I'm not complaining about that. It's just the way it is.
Well, and when you do it high quality like you do, I mean, it does take an investment of time. Totally.
Yeah, it does. It does. So at some point I was like, well, let me kind of experiment with almost like video essays where I'm just kind of telling a story based around experiences that I've had. I don't really consider them advice per se, because I can't really give anybody any advice because I've had a different set of experiences to everybody else.
Sure.
But, I appreciate hearing other people's stories who may have been through something similar and I can learn from without having to make the same mistakes or whatever. So it's like, I'm just going to share what I've been doing and what has worked, what hasn't worked for me, and see what happens. And some of those gained some traction. Then I was like, well, I have kind of a weird background of being classically trained and now doing ambient synth music, being like an organist who also, enjoys a good drone synth from time to time.
Yep.
And so it's like, well, that's actually kind of weird. And I never really thought of it that way because it was just me, right?
Sure,
It's like, well, there's nothing special about that because it's what I've always known.
Right.
So once I started kind of incorporating my past training in with, and like showing how I use some of those techniques, which might be considered old and outdated and people aren't really thinking about anymore with the new technology and stuff, that's really when the channel sort of took off a little bit.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know if that's sustainable either. Like I'm literally just experimenting with every video, but that's really all you can do. So
yeah,
it's been a lot of fun though. And I'm glad it's resonated with some people. And I enjoy making them. Try not to read too many comments, because once you do get any amount of outside people, once outside people that don't know who you are start finding the videos, that's a good sign, actually, I've come to learn.
Yeah.
But it also generates a lot of interesting comments that maybe you
Oh,
aren't
man.
prepared for.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, you clearly there's success going on because what's the age old thing? Like, you know that you've graduated to a new tier of success when the haters start showing up. And I love all the stuff you put out there, you know, in social and all that. But some of my favorites, and I've even messaged a little back and forth, and I'm sure others have as well. But just when you start posting some of the screenshots of the hater comments and stuff, and I mean, I laugh out loud almost all the time at them where you're just like, wow, like that person, what did you eat for breakfast that's just like rotting away in your stomach that you just had to like point that frustration at someone who's doing a modular synth YouTube video? It's fascinating to me. But
Yeah, a lot of grumpy people on the internet, turns out.
It's true, but I mean, like there's something to be told, and I love how you just said it, like to not give it much attention. You know, I've talked before about the idea of like, if you ever want to just get a stroke of not humility, but a stroke of perspective, like go look up 1-star reviews of some of the great literary classics of all time. Like you go look up 1-star reviews of Moby Dick and The Great Gatsby and The Grapes of Wrath, and you know, like what people are saying about these, you know, incredible books. I'm not saying that you have to enjoy. It's an artistic expression from the author, and if it's not your favorite book, like that's fine. But let's not break them down just through your tiny little lens of. I think the idea that when we post a 1-star review or when we post a hater comment or something, when it just comes with this mindset that like, I know everything, and here is why what you've done is not good, instead of approaching it like, man, I don't know if this is my favorite, but apparently some people think it's their favorite, and that's great, and I can appreciate that, and maybe the world's a little bit bigger than I'm letting on, and maybe there's something I can learn from that. So I appreciate your heart. I mean, what a human thing to get 100 incredible comments and, you know, millions of views, and then to have like 1 or 2 hater comments be the thing that's burning in the back of your brain, and how one could, and I don't think you do, but one could let that just tank all creative momentum or all like emotional bandwidth to just say, you know what, I don't think I'm going to write anything today. I think I'm just going to burn through my Netflix queue or something. And so I want to say thank you for punching that in the face and continuing to do the thing, man.
Yeah,
really.
the best policy is just to walk away, I've discovered, because when it first started happening, I enjoy witty banter, I guess you might say. And so I would always have like a snappy comeback or something, just ready to go. And I still like those pop in my head, but now it's just like, doesn't matter.
You're almost validating.
Don't get sucked into that world, because it can really, really mess with your head if you allow it to.
Yeah.
I forget who said it, but the best revenge is to not be like that person. And the best way to do that is just to let them say their piece and don't give it any more attention.
Oh, I love that. The best revenge. That's awesome. Man, you mentioned something, just the idea of using methods or techniques in the world of composing in the box, composing with instruments that are, for those who don't know that term, the idea of composing with virtual instruments or instruments that are inside the computer, air quotes, if you will.
Yeah.
But man, like I think there is something to talk about there too, because I feel like in today's day and age, and don't get me wrong, I love all the new stuff that's coming out, and I love that tech is continuing to progress and give us more and more ways to be creative and to just twist things around sonically and do all that. But I think there can be a lie that we buy into that's like, if I don't stay completely up to speed on everything that's going on, then that means my tried and true method of how I do this is going to become dated at some point. And I think depending on the genre, maybe that can be a little bit more on the nose, but you think about the pro golfer who is, I don't even play golf. This is the analogy apparently that came to my head where like you go out there, you have the clubs that, you have the length, you have the weight, the angle that you used so well for so many years. Just because there's a brand new club that came out or there's a new swing technique that everybody's using now, like, doesn't mean that if you don't adopt that or you don't buy that, then all of a sudden you're has-been, that it's your approach to the game is not as valuable as the rest. And so I think I needed to hear that today. I needed to just be reminded of the value of just trusting what you're creating. And yeah, when stuff excites you that comes out, like sure, adopt it into the process, but don't believe the lie that you are less than if you don't immediately get up to, the front of the edge of innovation in that sense. Because man, sometimes, staying at the front edge of innovation maybe can take some of your brain calories away that should have been pointed towards imagination or towards creation and execution. So at least that's just my perspective on that. But yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I heard Rick Rubin on a podcast, which I know he's like a
My boy.
polarizing figure now. Like you have, of course, the internet people who are like, he doesn't even play an instrument or anything. But it's like, yeah, clearly all of these artists who have worked with him, he's just a total fraud. But anyway.
Oh my goodness.
Anyway, we're back in internet world again. But he was saying, I think, a really interesting point. Somehow the topic came up about why the 80s sound like the 80s. And he pointed out that, well, everyone was reaching for the newest tools. Like at the time it was synthesizers and digital, was coming into play. He said, and that dated that music. It kind of locked it in that time. Whereas I think what he was telling artists to do around that time was use a piano, use a guitar, because that's kind of timeless. It's been around so long that it's kind of to the point where we don't associate it with any time period.
Sure.
So the ideas themselves have to be really strong and memorable. And you don't immediately go, oh, that was written in 1984,
Yeah.
So I found that really interesting, and it kind of mirrored what I've been thinking lately, which is like all of these techniques that I learned from my classical studies and everything. Like, for instance, I'm about to put out a video today, which by the time this airs will have been months ago, probably. But that talks about writing chord progressions and how, like back in the day, Bach didn't write chord progressions. He wrote parts. So basically a series of horizontal lines that, when all played together, would form the vertical chord, right?
Right.
And that created a sense of independence in each of the parts that he would write. And then you had, because the material was so strong, because each line was its own melody, essentially, you could then play like the alto and the bass together, and it works. You could play the alto and the tenor together, and it works. You could play the tenor and the soprano together, and it works.
Yeah.
So that has been really interesting to me, just in in the kind of music we make, in ambient music, where things are really slow moving. An interesting experiment for me has been, okay, well, how can I get more mileage out of a little bit of material? Right. And to me, since I've been an organist all these years, it kind of comes second nature. But again, as we've talked about with the YouTube channel, it forces me to think about the fact that other people don't think this way necessarily.
Yeah.
So I could share that and maybe they get something out of it. But anyway, that's kind of how I think about things from back in the days when I wrote for choirs and stuff.
Right.
It's like, okay, each part has to be important, and kind of independent. And that way I can just play the outer voices, for the introduction, and it works. And then when all four voices come in over here, it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So things like that to me are like, I think people look at that at like Bach and they would say, well, I don't want to do anything like that because that's not innovative. When now people have not been thinking that way for so long, it actually feels innovative.
Right. Yep. It's a fresh approach.
And do that.
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly. So the old thing kind of becomes new again.
That's so cool.
And there were reasons, back in the common practice period, they had all these rules for part writing and everything. And in music theory, we learn about all those rules, but we never really learn why they did those things or why they weren't really rules. They were just kind of the common practice. But we learned them as rules, right? So then we think, oh, I don't want rules,
Yeah.
But
Made
it's
to
like,
be
no,
broken.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, no, they're just kind of things that work. And once you see why they work, then you can decide what of it you want to use and what you want to discard, which is part of being a modern composer to me. It's like just borrowing from all of these different things that have happened for centuries, at this point. So it's that,
man.
I referenced this on another podcast recently. So anyone who listens to all my podcasts that I've been on is going to be like, he only knows this one thing, but
we're reinforcing, man. It's good.
It's good. The Lindy effect. is essentially something along the lines of the longer a thing exists, the more likely it is to continue to exist. So to me, like those things that have stood the test of time, there's a reason, and they're probably going to continue to stand the test of time. So yeah, I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but here we are.
I'm so glad you did, though. That's huge. There's so much good stuff in there. Well, and to kind of grab something from there and go to the next piece. I mean, you've referenced it a couple times. Well, and before we even go there, like, I love your approach, Nathan. I think that there is something really, like you said, really fresh, like how you know, what was born and bred into you, and the different practices and the different lanes, like a little bit more classically trained and whatnot, that now inform what is happening today. Like it's a unique path. I think that there's affirmation, not in replicating your path, but in there are so many journeys in how a musician or a composer or producer comes to the stage that they're at, and how those little informing stops along the way can bring something really fresh and really new, and something, frankly, that the world needs. And so I love how everything that has happened does inform your approach a lot.
Yeah, and if anyone takes anything away from that, it's exactly what you just referred to, which is like, you don't have to do what I did or have to have had the background that I had, but like, think about the background that you have had.
Yeah.
Like Dave Grohl, right? Was a drummer. Mm-hmm. And when you listen to the way he puts a Foo Fighters song together with all the guitar parts, I think he's actually said before, it's like a drum kit. Mm-hmm. So all the separation of like stuff hitting over here and over there, it's like, well, that's the snare and that's the hi-hat, but they're guitars, you know?
Yeah.
He was doing the same thing, right? He was using his past strengths to inform what he's doing now. So you probably have something we all have things that are unique to us because we all have different skills and experiences and all that kind of stuff. So I think for a lot of artists, like finding what that is difficult, and I'm no exception. It took me way too long to figure out, all of this stuff.
You and me both, my man.
Embarrassingly long.
Better late than never. We're late.
Yeah, I mean, when I discovered synthesizers, I was like, oh, well, let's listen to this art for, 20 minutes. Just like everybody else, because it's fascinating, to dig into sound design, which is a total other world, which I also love. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think about your experiences and what you can draw from those to inform what you want to do now. I think we all have those things, and sometimes they're just not obvious to us because we're us. Mm-hmm. So it's like you look at yourself in the mirror every day and you can't tell that you've lost this amount of weight or gained this amount of weight or whatever, because it's happened gradually.
Sure.
But someone else who hasn't seen you in several years is like, hey, you look good. You've lost 20 pounds or something.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, man.
No problem.
That's really kind of
you. You do look great, by the way.
Yeah, right back at you. Totally with you. That's huge. You referenced it a couple times now, but you've been an organist for decades at this point.
Since I started taking organ lessons at 15.
Wow. Yeah.
So I wanted to start earlier, but my piano teachers and the organ teacher that I started with said, get as much piano as you can first. Sure. Because it's a different beast, but the piano skills will help you.
Yeah.
So I've been doing it for a while.
I love it. And still to this day, do you still play pretty regularly?
Yeah, that's my day job, actually. Wow. I'm still a church organist. I play every week, rehearse the choir every Wednesday, and play a service every Sunday. So
my goodness, that's amazing. We could so geek out about your particular organ that you play. And I think just in a wider sense, the pipe organ is a fascinating instrument, because I don't know how many people understand that all those little individual tones that they hear layered on and off, it's not like on a synth where you press a button and it just makes, oh, there goes another oscillator. Oh, hey, I'm gonna make that sound a little different. Like, you're literally opening and closing different sized pipes and pushing different amounts of air through them. And it is just this electromechanical beast that really, I have no doubt that kind of what we already talked about, how that informs sound design, how that informs sort of your composing approach. And it is just a fascinating instrument. It is its own animal. Yeah.
Yeah. And kind of incredible to think how old it is. Can you imagine being someone in the 1600s who has never heard any music in the way that we think of, like they've never sat in a theater and they didn't sit in the theater and watch Interstellar, right? They didn't know what that kind of experience was like. So like walking into a cathedral or something and hearing a massive choir and a massive organ, like what kind of life-altering experience must that have been, right?
Yeah.
And of course, back then there were actual people down in the basement pumping the bellows because there was no
wild.
I have a blower. There's a blower motor on mine, so I don't have to. I don't have to actually pump it. But yeah,
you don't have the small children. Just
right. Okay, kids, time to head down to the basement and
burn off some energy. Oh,
it's
man,
like the coal room in a like steamship or something. Yeah, it's good.
It's so great.
And once again, you know, I've been playing it so long, I didn't really consider it interesting.
Sure.
Didn't really think anyone would care all that much because it's just kind of like, to me, synthesizers were more interesting because that was new to me.
Yeah.
But it's a difficult instrument to play. It's a difficult instrument to make sound good, I would say. You would think because it's so big and most of the time it's, you know, the better ones are in a good space with lots of reverb.
Sure.
Yeah, you can make it like a chord would sound good, but like to play literature on it that sounds good, it's not an expressive instrument.
Right.
So like it's essentially on or off with the velocity. There is no velocity sensitivity.
Isn't that crazy? And no sustain pedal or anything like that. Yeah.
No, well, no, your sustain is your fingers.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, and that's another thing to get really nerdy about it. Releases become just as important as attacks.
Sure.
Because the release, there's no variation in the velocity of the sound. There's no natural decay like there is on the piano. It just sustains at a steady volume. So like the releases have to be timed perfectly as well as the attacks. And that's one of the more difficult things. People think, oh, well, playing with your feet is hard. Yeah. But all of those doing finger legato and precise releases and all of those nuances, while also having to work the instrument and like adding stops, and the only real means of expression is a lot of organs will have an enclosed section. My organ happens to be fully enclosed, which means it's behind shutters, which I can open. The pipes are behind shutters.
Oh, cool.
So I have full expressivity using they look like expression pedals in the middle. But you're also manipulating those while playing parts with your feet, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a whole choreography thing that takes time. And I've often thought, you know, is this really worth it? It's like, well, I'm working so hard just to make this sound halfway decent.
No, I hear you. Well, and for anyone who didn't fully track with what we just talked about over the last 3 or 4 minutes and all that, like just the idea of having to put in a very different set of like physical performance rules to attain the outcome that you're looking for. I really think that there's something to just stretching yourself, right? Like there's something to just pushing yourself to adhere to a new practice that then, you know, at the very least, it's just giving you that much more momentum or that much more tenacity to go tackle the other hard things that are on, because it is a wildly different animal of an instrument. But then for you to run into stuff in the modular synth world that is also difficult, and that is another whole beast of a world for your organ approach, and not just, you know, the technique and all that, but for the willingness to look at it and kind of problem solve and all that. I think that does inform in a lot of areas of creativity. So yeah, what a crazy cool way to come at it all. I love it. Yeah.
It's another world for sure. And I'm glad I still get to play pretty often just to keep my chops up and remind myself of those things. But I can't say it's what makes me get out of bed in the morning at this point. It's like, I do enjoy the production side of things.
Yeah. Well, and man, in that world, honestly, Nathan, like you and I want to dig into, you know, the modular synth side and analyze, just to go after your sound design process, because I listen to a lot of different artists in the, you know, in the ambient, you know, cinematic film scoring world, kind of the, you know, however many genres you want to lump into the pool that we're sitting in. And man, I am hard pressed to find someone who approaches the granular, approaches the small details and what's happening really on like it's almost like on a canvas that is blank, and there are those like visual, you know, like painters, visual artists who will put over these really, really subtle layers on the entire canvas before they even start with anything else. And I feel in a lot of senses that those are the kind of details. You pay attention to a lot of details all over the place, but the very bottom background layers are something that I hear in your work that always wowed me. It just always feels like there was thought and intentionality to even the smallest little pieces that are floating around. And yeah, I love that approach. Is that something that you consciously think about, or are you just kind of like listening for the thing that catches your ear? We've been talking here for quite a while, so I have a feeling that we might pop off a cork on a bottle that might lead to part 2 we'll have to record sometime in the future. But just like in a nutshell, tell me a little bit about your sound design approach and kind of what that looks like in your world.
It varies. I have a lot of hardware at this point, so my process is a little different. Like on the EP that I put out with Slow Echo,
Respirate.
That was 100% DAW-less, which I hate to even use the term because that's another trigger word on the internet.
I hear you.
But yeah, and so I was literally just sitting down and kind of improvising with a couple pieces of gear on that. And in some cases, it was a modular synth and a tape machine. In some cases, it was the Rhodes and a little looper pedal or something. And the process of doing that has informed my work within the DAW as well, because I found that I spend more time and more attention on the little details like you were talking about, like getting, and also I've noticed with hardware that I'll turn a knob further than I'll click a knob.
Oh,
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So like just exploring on hardware, I tend to go to extremes and then back my way back to a place, where I feel fits my taste. Whereas with the mouse, I always feel like I'm more conservative because I don't know why that is. It's just the way it is,
Yeah. It's saying something. I hear you.
Yeah. And so that has caused me to kind of inadvertently discover, essentially, if you want to get really boiled down to what it really is, probably is just bandpass filters.
Sure. Yep.
And it's just eliminating more of the frequency range, right?
Right. Yep.
Because what I discovered was most of the music from a production standpoint, even ambient music that I really enjoy, there's either fewer elements or there are a lot of elements that are really small in terms of frequency.
Sure.
So everything feels like it has its own place and there's separation within. I love a mix where you can hear where things are supposed to live. There's separation between the elements. And in ambient music, sometimes that's difficult, especially if you're thinking everything as like washed out with reverbs, which we all love reverbs and everything.
Yeah.
But I'll, for instance, with like a tape deck or something, if I'm just recording, 4 mono parts, being very important.
Yeah.
And I'm using a mono reverb on those parts, and then I can pan everything, that whole channel with the reverb and everything. So it's like printed, off to this side. Yep. And then I pan something else with a delay that's also mono over to this side. All of a sudden, there's so much space down the middle then for whatever you want the focal point to be. And you get this sense of width that you cannot get just by putting a stereo reverb on something and then grabbing like isotope stereo widener and cranking that thing, because that creates all kinds of, the stuff that I did when I was first starting out,
Of course.
So yeah, that's been a revelation. A lot of times it's just more layers than you think. When you hear a mix that's really like has that sense of separation and intentionality to it, where it's like everything feels like it was meant to go where it is,
Sure. Yep.
So that's what I'm kind of chasing with my own productions, I guess. And I think hardware kind of helped me discover that because you're more limited,
Yeah.
You only have so many channels. Some of them might be mono, like on the Eurorack system. And so then you have to figure out, okay, how can I make an effective full sounding mix out of these few elements, and suddenly it's more clarity somehow. So
no, but I mean, creative fences are so important. Like sometimes the endless, literally endless world of, oh, hey, I can download this, or hey, I can do this and that. When you get down, like you said, to the hardware and like, okay, I've got 4 channels. Here we go. There's something that just like brings up in your system. I mean, it's kind of the equivalent of they talk about like, hey, if you want to get an essay done or you're working on a thesis paper or something, like go to the coffee shop without your charger, right? So that you're just like, okay, I've got however much percent that's left in this thing. I just gotta, it's just a different set of fences. That's not quite apples to apples, but you know what I mean? Like there's something happens in us when we put limitations around it. And I think that clearly in your work, like it's bringing some really cool stuff to life. And I really do adore it, man. I really do. You did a super cool remix on one of the songs from my Godspeed release a while ago. And it was, to be honest, like it felt like kind of the dark horse of that whole release in the best way, where it was like, this is almost like Nathan gets it. You know, it wasn't, okay, I'm just going to tweak a couple things and there it goes. But it was very clear that it was a well thought, what am I going to do to this? And I was really happy with how it turned out. It was such
thanks,
a cool
man.
thing.
I appreciate that. Yeah. You thought to yourself, it seems like Nathan really knows how not to get on a playlist.
Oh man.
And that's true.
Hey, you know, if at the end of the day, if the goal is I want to create stuff that moves me and the right people will, and it might take quite a while, but like the right people will find it. Whether that's thousands or millions or hundreds or gazillions, you know, whatever. I want to make sure that we all keep leaning in that direction as opposed to, well, I've got this idea, but you know, if I tweak it a little ways away from my early creative thoughts on it, like it will probably spike an algorithm, you know, over here and it's gonna do, and like, I get it. I get that certain things do line up well with playlists and stuff, but at the same time, I would rather write something that moves me and have it get picked up by a playlist than write something for a playlist and then be like, oh, okay, that's part of my catalog for the rest of forever. Okay. Yeah, it's a unique tightrope we walk, my brother.
It is.
Goodness. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's probably a whole other episode we could get into on playlisting and stuff.
We got all sorts of fun stuff for part 2. My goodness. Right. My goodness. Nathan, as we start wrapping up here, tell me a little bit about what is coming out in your world. I know obviously a lot of YouTube videos are continuing to hit, and I'm excited to watch those, but is there anything in the music world that you're going to be releasing soon? And I also know that you have some incredible sound design packs and products that are available too. So yeah, what's coming up for you, man? What's coming out into the world?
Yeah, I've got no albums or anything really on the immediate horizon, but I do have several singles and stuff that are probably going to be coming out, trickling out over the fall and into early next year as well. So some solo piano stuff I've been getting back to.
Amazing.
It's kind of they're always kind of a palate cleanser for me, just stripping it to the bare bones and just working on notes, you know. So yeah, some solo piano stuff probably coming sometime this fall.
Awesome. Can't wait. Before we leave, I want to hit you with the all ambient lightning round. Are you ready for this? So we're talking.
I was not prepared in advance.
You were not. Maybe that just like anyone who is struck by lightning is probably not prepared for that. That's
fair point.
There we go. Quick answers right off the top of your head. It can be as long or short as you want. But first thing that comes to mind. Here we go. Nathan, what are you geeking out about right now, whether it's somebody's music that just got released or a piece of gear or someone just whatever else? What are you geeking out about right now?
Does it have to be music related?
No, it can be whatever related. Yeah.
Okay. I recently have just gotten back into video games.
Nice. What'd you get?
Well, I've been playing Starfield.
Okay.
I got COVID like right around the time it came out, so it was like, this is perfect.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So
I have not downloaded it yet.
Now, so.
I don't know if I've made the disk space for it yet, but it's on my short list. That's cool.
Yeah, I kind of, you know, I took a long break from gaming. I used to play and stuff, you know, back in like the Mass Effect days and all that stuff. I love a big RPG. So I've been enjoying getting back into that. And actually related to music, I've been playing some of Austin Wintory's games. He's a composer who writes... Yeah. He wrote the soundtrack for Journey, which is an incredible game and an incredible soundtrack. I think he almost won a Grammy for that, actually.
Wow.
And yeah, I've been playing a lot of his games because he is a bit more traditionally minded in terms of like orchestral writing and strong melodies and things like that. Not saying he can't do the other stuff, but
Sure.
he's very, very good at that stuff. And he's also incredibly interested in how the game interacts with the music.
Yeah.
In terms of like, in one of his games that I played recently, you're like swimming through the whole thing. And if you swim alongside some dolphins, like the woodwinds come in.
That's really cool.
And it's like, this is kind of incredible. You know, I haven't really thought of it in this way. So, yeah, I'm going to try to get him on the channel at some point to talk about how all of that works. So, yeah.
Well, and that kind of, it's fun because the moment that you were talking earlier about the early composers writing linearly, you know, like on a horizontal plane and the parts interacting with each other and you can pull parts out and put parts back in. I know it wasn't quite apples to apples, but I was thinking how that relates to like video game composition, because there are layers that you want to be able to pull out and push back in that certainly, you know, coalesce with each other, but that also mark kind of what you said, like what's happening, you know, on the screen, how you're interacting with the game. And I love that. That's genius, man. So cool. Great answer. Starfield. Let's go. Okay. Next one. What is one weird thing about you, Nathan, that most people do not know?
I used to be really into strength training. And I tore my labrum in 2016, which just so happens, and that's I just lost a cartilage in your shoulder that kind of connects things together. I tore it deadlifting. You know. Yeah, it's a good thing to have, turns out. And coincidentally, 2016 was around the time I started actually releasing music. And that was kind of a catalyst for it, because I was just kind of going along and I had just gotten the current church job where I still am now. Yeah. So things were good and I had no like real reason to light a fire under myself, I guess. I was too comfortable. And so I was learning about the DAW and stuff. And that's kind of when it hit me, was in that time I was a little depressed, to be honest, because I couldn't do much. And that's kind of when the idea that I was talking about at the beginning of the interview came about, where it's like during that reflective time of like, well, maybe I should just be writing my own stuff and trying to get good at it. And then maybe people will come to me. So that's how it all started, was me tearing my shoulder apart.
Hey, well, not that we thank the injury for happening, but it's part of the journey. That's great, man.
It's all better now. There's several hooks in there holding everything together. So it's great.
The bionic man. That's great. Okay, here we go. Next one. What is something that almost nobody agrees with you on? And you can be as lighthearted or as controversial with this one as you want. But yeah, what's something that almost nobody agrees with you on?
I guess maybe musically speaking, I'm not a big fan of musical theater.
Okay.
I guess there are other people who aren't fans of musical theater, but I don't know a lot of them in music.
Sure.
And of course I was accompanist for a lot of vocalists and stuff in college. So I had a lot of exposure to it, and I always tried, but I just never quite clicked with me. So of course what I did from there was go on all the YouTube videos and just leave hateful comments saying that everyone who did enjoy it was an idiot. So
that's the quote for the whole podcast episode right there. You nailed the soundbite. That's huge.
As I understand it, that is what YouTube is for. So.
Well, perfect. That's great. I love it. It's funny. It's jumping out at me right now, but the idea of musical so you think about, I'm just going with the first one that comes to mind, but like the Music Man, like we're talking a pretty universally recognizable musical. There is a copyist mentality perhaps to this, because like the music at any given point, who knows how many high schools, community theaters, Broadway productions, off Broadway, like all the whole spectrum, how many different productions of The Music Man are going on at any given moment, or how many are done over the course of a year or a decade. And they're all essentially using the same music, like whoever's playing piano is playing the exact same parts, and then whatever size of the pit orchestra and all that. And not that those are songs that aren't, very recognizable or well-written songs, but to me, there's always been kind of this level of like, okay, you can play that piece of music that's in front of you, but like, if I were to ask you to improvise off of that, like, are you able to do it? And it's funny how there seems to be a whole lane of people who are really good at just churning out the, sheet music in front of them, but to be able to deviate from that, it's almost as though you just, they just ran into oncoming traffic.
You just described the entire world I came from of classical,
classically trained musicians,
where it's mostly just regurgitating like what is on the page.
Yeah.
And that's why I
And
wanted to get into composition.
I just want to be super clear. It takes so much skill to be able to play what's on the page. I'm not downplaying any of that, but it is fascinating to me that to be so musically talented in that lane, and then for it to just feel like it falls off a cliff when you ask the question of like, let's go beyond the page. Let's push it further.
It takes so much time. My theory is that we spend so much time, because that was an issue for me too, of course, since I was studying classical piano for most of my life. But my theory is it takes so much time and focus to be able to do that at a high level that you just don't work on the creative side other than interpretation of what you're playing, you know?
Yeah. It's like a different discipline.
Yeah, it is. It definitely is.
Interesting. Okay, man. Last question. Thank you again so much for running a little long with me.
Oh, it's been awesome, man. Yeah. Enjoyed it.
Nathan, what would you tell the beginning musician version of yourself? Maybe going back 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. I mean, as far back as you want to go. What would you tell the beginning musician version of yourself?
Listen to more stuff. Listen to a wider variety of things, probably, because I really think that's what develops taste. And ultimately, taste is what develops an artistic voice. It's just having more exposure to a wider array of things.
Sure, yeah.
And it's one reason I am thankful that I did come up through the type of training that I had, because I was exposed to more things that I wouldn't have listened to otherwise, you know. But yeah, I think just even at an earlier age, and definitely when I started really getting sucked into the classical world, don't be such a snob, is definitely what I would have told teenage me.
Yeah.
Because I was definitely of that mindset that, well, if it's not that technically demanding, or, you know, if it seems simple, you know, if it was pop, I didn't want anything to do with it. There was no value in it to me at that point.
Sure.
Yeah, just don't be such a snob, and realize that there is probably something excellent about it, whether it's the production, the mixing. I just wasn't even aware. I didn't know those things.
Right,
you know, at that time. So, don't be a snob, I guess is what I would say.
That is a great, there's soundbite number 2. Man, we nailed it. We're just crushing it left and right. That's so great. Nathan, I'm really grateful that we got the chance to do this. Thanks for sharing your, not just your wisdom and some stories, but your heart. Seriously, I love your approach. I love not only the you know, the actual art that you're putting out into the world, but how you arrive at that destination. It's an inspiration. So keep up the great work, man. Really appreciate you, and 100% we're gonna do a part 2 because there's more to crack open. But as for now, thank you so much for being on the All Ambient podcast.
Thanks, Mike. It was an honor and really enjoyed it.
Thank you again for listening to the All Ambient podcast. Music throughout all of today's episode was from the catalog of Jameson Nathan Jones. And you can find all of this music along with a bunch of other incredible songs, bundles, and other resources from an amazing group of composers and producers at all-ambient.com. And be sure to use the promo code podcast25. That's podcast25. And you'll get 25% off of any product at all-ambient.com. It's a great opportunity to save even more on an incredible resource for your next film, video, or project. Don't wait for another second. Head over to allambient.com and use promo code podcast25. Again, that's podcast25 to get 25% off of your next purchase. Make sure that you subscribe to the podcast so you can catch every conversation we have with all these incredible people who share the same passion. I'm looking forward to the next time. I hope that you are too. Can't wait to see you then. And until then, have an incredible day. Here's hoping that this music and the heart behind it makes your day and life that much better. See you next time.